male masculinity has been represented in films for decades. It has set the tone for how many young men see and idolize these actors and characters on screen. This is explained by Dr. Carolyn Heldman.
Predominant male archetypes that we see in film and television and other forms of popular culture are the strong, silent guy who is always in control and is not emotional. And then we have the superhero character, the hero character, engaging in high levels of violence in order to maintain that control, in order to achieve whatever goal he has in front of him.
Hollywood has depicted masculinity in various forms and genres, with John Wayne's brutal portrayal in many westerns to the hard-body action males of the 80s. Iconic actors like Sylvester Stallone in films like Rocky, Cobra, and Arnold Schwarzenegger in Predator and Terminator have now given way to a kinder, gentler version in modern Hollywood from actors such as multiple versions of the Hulk in the Marvel Cinematic Universe and Timothée Chalamet in Dune, who use their mind over their muscles but can still embody the physicality without the 80s physique. In this video essay, we explore how Hollywood changed how masculinity is presented in Western cinema for over 30 years. Part 1. How Hollywood heroes have defined masculinity through generations. Hollywood's heroes have defined many boys' and men's views of masculinity through film. Film's power of suggestion has always been strong, even as early as 1930s, with John Wayne's brutal portrayal in many westerns such as Stagecoach, to the hard-body action heroes of the 80s with their thirst for action, guns, and violence. The 80s and 90s were the height of overt male masculinity in films, with big body actors like Arnold Schwarzenegger in Predator and Terminator. In his first scene in The Terminator, we literally see him in his full glory naked, in a full bodybuilding pose, showing off his big muscular body for the audience to gaze. And then from Sylvester Stallone's portrayal of the lead character Rocky Balboa in Rocky, with his muscular, ribbed boxing physique, a story in which we see he has to fight his way out of bad situations. In his portrayal of John Rambo in First Blood, he plays a soldier who returns home from war and now has to fight a new war of his own. During the 80s, President Ronald Reagan, ex-actor and conservative politician, was in office from 1981 to 1989. During this period, we saw many movies and actors representing the American hero role from the militarized point of view, which was reflected in the hyper-accentuated masculinity with the heavily muscular bodies in such films like Rambo Trilogy, Predator, and Top Gun, all portraying the alpha males that could fight their way out of any situation. These hyper-masculine male characters are often the leads in their films, but designed for an audience to empathize with. Thus, these films force audiences to find common ground with toxic men, whether they want to or not. Part 2. The shift in the type of male actors in Western cinema action hero. Simultaneously, in the 80s, we started to see a shift in how masculinity is viewed in films. We started to see in these films with teenagers as the lead instead of action hero films that had overt masculinity in them. Films like The War Games, Ferris Bueller's Day Off, and Francis Ford Coppola's The Outsiders saw these changes. Only 4 years after his epic Vietnam War movie Apocalypse Now, Francis Ford Coppola turned his attention closer to home with his adaptation of S.E. Hilton's 1967 novel about teenage gangs in Nebraska. While the two films may be set worlds apart, they both offer similar explorations of the ruinous psychological impact of violence. So in the 1960s, the outsiders see frictions between rival gangs from opposing sides of the track. The poor greasers and the rich socks escalate into murder. Told through the viewpoint of a 14-year-old ponyboy, C. Thomas Howell, a quiet young man swept into a situation by his hot-blooded best friend. It is a hard-hitting allegory for the devastation of toxic masculinity. We started to see a shift in how the male lead is viewed, from the heavily muscular body full of testosterone that was emotionally void to a smaller-bodied, kinder and emotionally in touch with their feminine side, which had lagged generations before in films. We saw this shift also in more traditional action films.
Just another American who saw too many movies as a child. Another orphan of a bankrupt culture who thinks he's John Wayne, Rambo, Marshall Dillon.
was always kind of partial to Roy Rogers, actually. Let's come out to the coast. We'll get together, have a few laughs.
Such as Lethal Weapon and Die Hard.
Yippee-ki-yay, motherfucker.
Lethal Weapon presents Mel Gibson as a strung-out cop with a death wish. It was not a seismic change, with Gibson still doing a lot of the standard action hero stunts of the time, but it gave the protagonist an issue to deal with that was not external. Then in Die Hard, Bruce Willis runs around the building, avoiding and fighting his way out of trouble. However, he struggles with every position he ends up in, which is a departure from early action heroes of the 80s like Stallone and Schwarzenegger, which solely used their muscles and brawns to fight their way out of any situation, almost superhuman-like. Unlike Bruce Willis and Mel Gibson's characters, having not just external conflicts but internal conflicts along the way. We see this in Die Hard with John McClane only using confrontation towards his antagonist when he feels he has the upper hand and is safe from retaliation. We still see this juxtapose of stereotypes of the traditional lead male movie characters from today's films. From emotionally repressed action stars afraid to show any form of femininity to the softer, emotionally available lead actors of today. The Marvel Cinematic Universe is an excellent example of how masculinity is being used and also shows the tropes and toxic masculinity of the action heroes previously mentioned. A great example of this is from the Hulk. Early on in the Hulk storyline in these movies is that his alter ego Bruce Banner has conflicts with the destruction that the Hulk has caused. To the wider public, and the ones closest to him like Natasha Romanoff, who is the only one who can talk the Hulk back to Bruce's Banner. In later films like Endgame, where Bruce and the Hulk found common ground, they became one as the Smart Hulk. A combination of the muscular 8'5" Smash Hulk resembling the hard-body action heroes of the 80s like Arnold Schwarzenegger, and Bruce Banner's softer, kinder, and more feminine personality, where he's able to come to terms with his conflictions. Bruce pushed against toxic masculinity by taking personal responsibility for himself, rather than expecting another person to heal him. And this is ultimately what allowed him to interrogate all aspects of his personality, which we see today with actors like Timothée Chalamet, who is leading the way we see today's heroes. Chalamet's roles challenge traditional masculinity through emotional vulnerability and queerness, but also having the physical presence. Male movie stars have long been defined by the old model of masculinity. However, Chalamet, who rose to fame playing queer characters and whose style is frequently described as androgynous, invents a kind of masculinity that's different, more sensitive, and more emotional. We see this when he plays a 17-year-old student who falls in love with an older man in Call Me By Your Name, to his role as Paul Atreides in the blockbuster sci-fi action film Dune. Dune shows this with the cast of the actors we see around him. From Jason Momoa's role harking back to the roles of Arnold Schwarzenegger with the big body muscular actors who fight his way through everyone, and then Chalamet's character who uses his mind and emotions to get him through, and only uses his physical attributes to fight when needed. In conclusion, masculinity presented in Western cinema over the last 30 years has changed, and now we have a new modern era of men, one who can be tough and strong physically, and can show both feminine and masculine qualities. Thank you for watching.